Good morning, everyone. How you doing? It is so good to see you here Labor Day weekend, and you came. You guys are like the rock star Christians. Way to go. Now we can wear white shoes, or we can't wear white shoes, or we can wear white pants, or we should never wear white pants. Is that something like that? I can't keep up with that. But I'm Ian, and we're thrilled that you are here. Many of you know that years ago, I spent a summer in India. And that changed my life in a number of ways, but there was a proverb that someone told me while I was there that has stuck with me ever since. And it goes like this: tell me a fact and I'll learn it. Tell me a truth and I'll believe it. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. Isn't that beautiful? Stories have a profound way of gripping us, of sticking with us. I imagine when a lot of us get together with our family, perhaps for a holiday, you likely don't speak in binary with them, right? You're probably not spending the bulk of your time sharing statistics and facts and data, although that might be part of it. My guess is that when you gather with friends and family, the thing you do most is share stories. Some of them perhaps heroic, others maybe a bit embarrassing. I have a few of those myself, but there's something about stories that are powerful, that are vital to who we are. And so we're in week 2 of our series called My Way Back, where we're reminding each other, or perhaps telling for the first time, that each and every one of us has a powerful story to tell. So we're doing something a little different for this series, and we're actually hearing from various different campus pastors as they model for us this storytelling as they tell their own story. Last week we heard from Obi and Eric, and today we're going to hear from new pastors this week, and we're going to begin with our Plainfield campus pastor, Pastor John. Take a look.
I was probably 4, maybe 5 years old, and the routine in our home was that it was my mom who would put us to bed at night and kind of the bedtime routine. And I don't know, I was scared of lots of things. 4 or 5 years old, I was scared of the dark, scared of the monster under the bed kind of thing. And I remember one night in particular, and again, I had to be 5 years old, and I asked her a question, and I said, "Mom, what happens to a person after they die?" I don't know if you guys thought about that stuff when you were 5 years old, but that was on...
I didn't.
No.
I was thinking Hot Wheels.
Yeah, Hot Wheels, yeah. And I think I wanted to know because thinking back on my childhood, there wasn't really a whole lot of spiritual components to it. We didn't go to church. I don't remember ever owning a Bible. We didn't pray. We didn't really talk about God. And so I think, even at 5, there was something in me that was like, okay, what happens? And I'll never forget my mom's answer because it's kind of etched in my memory and it's kind of haunted me a little bit through my childhood. She said, well, when a person dies, if they know Jesus, they'll get to be with him in heaven forever. But if they don't know Jesus when they die, then they just, and maybe she made this up, I don't know, they just don't exist anymore. And that kind of stuck with me through my childhood. And in fact, so much so that when I was about 8 or 9 years old, all my friends went to church. I never got to go to church. I actually rode my bike to a church without my parents' knowledge. And I just wanted to experience it, like, who is this Jesus? And I don't remember anything about the service, but I remember 2 prayer cards that were in the back of the pew. And I just took those. And really all through my childhood, they'd be by my bedside, and I would read this prayer because I wanted to know Jesus.
And your stolen prayer cards.
Yeah, they're stolen.
That's good.
Yeah, I don't know if I was supposed to take them or not. That's cool. But I did. And I had those things committed to memory. My prayer life really kind of picked up steam in college because I went to the University of Iowa. It was about 200 miles from home, so my family's not around me. I didn't know any classmates who went. I didn't really have any friends my whole freshman year. I had some challenges with my roommates, like maybe all freshmen. I'm overwhelmed with the newness, the studies, and how to make all that work. And then on top of that, I started to get sick, maybe stress level kind of thing. And your body kind of wears down. So every night during my freshman year of college, I was praying for my health. I was praying for friends, and I was even praying, God, I'm so lonely. I pray that you bring a girl that I could fall in love with and marry. And nothing happened, overnight. It wasn't until my sophomore year That's actually when I met Amy, who I end up marrying later on. I met her actually in a singing group. I joined it. It was like a local kind of campus Christian thing. And if I kind of just go a little fast forward to it was like a senior year, and this is where things really picked up spiritually. Amy's mom lived nearby, and they kind of grew up with a traditional kind of church thing. I don't think any of them would have said they had a relationship with God, but there was one day in particular that her mom showed up. We were having lunch, and she was just different. Like she just had like a smile about her. There was like a new kind of joy, a new skip in her step, and so she said, well, I found this Christian church, and in her own way, she didn't use these words, but she found her way back to God. And she was talking about her relationship with Jesus. She was talking about how she was reading the Bible and it made sense. And we started going to a church in our neighborhood. And it was interesting. It was one day in particular that the pastor ended the service with what you would consider an altar call. We don't really do those all that often. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So he asks everybody to close their eyes, and if you're ready to say yes to Jesus, if you know that you need Jesus in your life, then go ahead and
Raise your hand.
Yeah, raise your hand kind of thing, right? Well, I raise my hand and I'm holding my wife's hand, so both our hands go up
So you
in the
volunteer
air.
for both of you?
So Amy's like, that's great.
Amy, you need this too. That's right. And it was at that point then that we really wanted to take our faith seriously, because now I believed, but I wanted, okay, what is it that I'm really believing, and how do I have this relationship? We were out to dinner in Naperville at Lou Malnati's. You like Lou Malnati's?
Love
Of
it.
course.
Love it.
Best pizza?
Great pizza.
Way better than Giordano's.
One of the best pizzas.
One of? Yeah. We think it's great. And we were at Lou Malnati's, and the restaurant's like closing down. Our friends have been asking us all night that we were with about certain spiritual things, and Amy and I, we're like brand new Christians. We're like novices. We don't even know a whole lot, but we did the best we could to answer their questions. And then just as the restaurant's closing up, there's like a guy sitting over, a few tables over, and he gets up, and I expect him to like walk out the door, but instead he's walking over to our table. And he looks at my friends, and he looks at us, and then he looks back at them, and he's like, hey, I just want you guys to know that your friends here, what they shared with you is true. Long story short, he ends up inviting us to be a part of Community Christian Church. And the very next Sunday, we showed up, and it's really at Community that we learned what it means to become a follower of Jesus, not just a believer in Jesus. We got invited to be a part of a small group. We learned how to read our Bible. We learned how to, have a prayer life, to have a relationship. Amy and I later then make a decision to be baptized. We learned all about that. And the story comes full circle because it was my parents, both my mom and my dad, who start attending Community with us. And my mom got involved in a small group, and it was the ladies in her small group coupled with Amy and I who, we had the opportunity to kind of lead her into a relationship with Jesus. And she had been diagnosed with cancer, and she knew she didn't have long, but her faith was real, and she asked us if we would baptize her. And I just still remember the day that I got to baptize my mom, and I got to baptize my dad as well. He made that.
That's very cool.
Yeah, he made that decision. And just shortly before my mom, passed away, I asked her, I said, so hey mom, what's God saying to you? How are you, what's your relationship like? And she just kind of looked right at me and she said, he says that I get to be with him. I get to be with him. And that goes right back to that one of those first memories. What happens when you die? Well, if you believe in Jesus, you get to be with him.
Whew. I love that story. So last week when we started this series, we talked about the significance of composing our story, of actually writing it down. And the cards are available this week as well. If you haven't done this, I highly encourage you to actually fill this out, to write your story down. And we talked about a Christ follower has a My Way Back story that's actually fairly simple. It has 3 components. My life before I met Jesus. What was your life like? How would you describe it? How you met Jesus. Maybe someone invited you to a service. Maybe you just hit rock bottom and God showed up in a really powerful way. And then thirdly, how is my life different having met Jesus? How do I see people and my spouse and finances and communities differently as a result of Jesus in my life? Because here's the reality that every single one of us has a story. Scars and all, everyone in this room has a story. But as you may have guessed, having a story isn't enough. We have to actually share it. We have to tell it. We have to speak it. And so to get some help with that, we're actually going to turn to Romans 10. Now in Romans 10, there's some context you should understand. The people of Israel for centuries had long awaited for what they called the Messiah, the one who would come and save them and free them and deliver them, because the people of Israel for hundreds of years had existed under oppressive Roman empires. They had had some difficult times, some struggle and heartache. They've been carried off into captivity, and they've still waited and waited and waited for the foretold Messiah. And then the Apostle Paul, here in Romans 10, declares that the wait is over. Listen to what he writes here. So if you believe deep in your heart that God raised Jesus from the pit of death, and if you voice your allegiance by confessing the truth that Jesus is Lord, then you will be saved. He says, this is what we've been waiting for. This is who we've been waiting for, and it's Jesus. It's him, but the good news gets even better. Listen to what he writes. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Now, I did a little bit of research, and the Greek of that word, everyone, actually has a fascinating meaning. You wanna know what it means? Yeah, everyone. That's actually what it means. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But then one verse later, we're confronted with a 3-letter word that stops us in our tracks. It's this word, but. Now that's a big but, am I right? In fact, why don't you turn to your neighbor and say, that's a big but. It's okay, it's church, we're all friends here. But what? What could Paul possibly be warning us about that would keep people from finding their way back to God? This is what he writes. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And then lastly, he says this, and how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? Dang. That's a bit convicting, isn't it? How will people meet Jesus if no one tells them the story? We all have a story to tell, a powerful, beautiful, profound story to tell, but the power's sort of locked up. It won't be released unless it's told. It's kind of like this. How many of you are familiar with the concept of potential energy? How many? Liars, I just made it up. No, I'm kidding, it's an actual thing. Potential energy is essentially this. It's the energy that's stored in an object at rest. It has potential to be used in a really powerful way. I think maybe the best example is that of a roller coaster. Any roller coaster junkies in the house? Yeah, and you remember the terrifying pit in your stomach feeling as you clink up that first hill? I think the noise is added just to freak us out, right? Just clink, 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 clink. Anyone ever made the mistake of sitting in the very front of a roller coaster? Yeah, you're the ultimate crazies. And it goes clink, 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 clink. And as it's kind of nearing the top and you're questioning your life decisions, that roller coaster is being filled with potential energy. And then there's that moment, right? That moment after it reaches the top and you wet your pants just a little bit, and there's that brief pause. That roller coaster is full of potential energy. But the thrill, the real thrill, isn't released until what? It goes screaming over that hill, and we all scream with it. Think of your My Way Back story like that. It's packed with potential energy, but the power is only really released, though, when it's shared. You have a story to tell. Don't let fear, doubt, or shame con you into silence. There is power in what God has done and is doing in your life. In fact, Here's something I've found to be true. Often the most painful part of our story is the most life-giving part of someone else's. Anyone know what I'm talking about? But that power is only released when it's shared. Years ago, I saw a video from a man named Penn. Anyone know who Penn is? He's Penn of Penn and Teller. He's a magician and an entertainer, but he's also a very vocal atheist. And he tells a story about someone who came up to him after a show and handed him a Bible. And you would think that a profound atheist would have some thoughts about this interaction, and it turns out he does, and he recorded this short video, but there's a quote, just an excerpt that I want to share with you today that rocked me to my core. Here's what he said. He said, I've always said that I don't respect people who don't proselytize. Proselytize is simply sharing your story. He says, if you believe that there's a heaven and a hell, and people could be going to hell, and you think it's not really worth telling them this because it would make it socially awkward, how much do you have to hate someone to believe that everlasting life is possible and not tell them that? I think we could learn a thing or two from Penn. Here's the bottom line. We don't know what could happen when we open our mouths and share our story. Your story just might save someone's life. It might change someone's life, just like our Lincoln Square campus pastor, Jesse.
I was raised by a single mom. We didn't do the church thing. She worked really hard. 3 jobs at a time, trying to provide and make sure that I had a good life. My extended family, my cousins and my aunts and uncles, they all did the church things, and I would go with them every once in a while. I guess probably right around the beginning of adolescence, 12 and 13, for whatever reason, and I could probably list a laundry list of reasons, I guess, but I decided I hated God. I despised him, believed in him, and despised him. And I really began this very dark period of my life where I was a bully. I would, I'd see Christians in the hallway and beat them up or knock Bibles out of their hands.
Wow.
I was just angry. I was angry with God, and for some reason, Christians in my mind, they were like the physical representation of God. Probably about that same time, I began to drink really heavily. I began to use drugs really heavily. I actually started dealing drugs, probably about 15 years old. I got my first job at a Dairy Queen. I started dealing drugs there at the Dairy Queen.
Like the drive-through or something?
Through the drive-through. So I dealt drugs to all my coworkers.
Drive-through drugs?
Gave them a discount, and they didn't rat me out. And I did that for probably just over a year.
Wow.
And it was sometime in this period of time that my best friend at the time, his name was Jimmy, he had a crush on this girl in our high school, and she told him that she would not date him unless he went to her church. Like any good wingman does, I agreed to go to church with Jimmy and his future girlfriend, I guess. So I went to church, and I spent time with this youth group, and I hated every minute of it. They were super weird. I just felt so uncomfortable there. So I stopped going, but this youth group kept pursuing me. Like they kept chasing me down. They'd see me in the hallway and they'd come and talk to me, and I was like, listen, you misunderstand what we're doing here. I'm not one of you.
I beat up Christians.
Yeah, it's everything I can not to beat you up right now. It got so bad that finally they were inviting me to this weekend retreat that their youth group did together at some wilderness camp, and they just wouldn't stop. And I'm like, I don't have the money, I can't do it. And they came back and, we got somebody to pay for it. And I'm like, all right, so now what do I do? And I finally said, listen, I'll make you a deal. I will go with you to this camp if you promise that you will never ask me to ever do anything else with your church again. And they kind of huddled up and came back to me, and they said all right, that's a deal. If you come to the camp, we'll never ask you to do anything else with our church again. So I went to the camp, and I was super uncomfortable. I pull up, and it's almost every horror movie idea I had about a wilderness camp, because I got there late, so it was dark and couldn't see anything, and it was these nasty cabins with bugs in them and stuff. And I went to put my stuff in there, and I see this guy I know from school, and he was in a band, and I was in a band, and we were friends with each other. Our bands were friends with each other, and I'm like, dude, how did they get you here? Like, how did they con you into coming to this thing? And he was like, oh, this is my church, I'm a Christian. And I'm like, no, you're not a Christian. I've never seen you there. And he's like, well, I don't go super regularly, but it's my church, I'm a Christian, this is what I do. That kind of started this conversation that lasted all night long. We didn't go to sleep, we stayed up till probably 4:30 in the morning. And I just kept telling him every reason why I hated God, I hated Christians. And every time he would just listen. And when he had something to say, he would answer, and other times he would just say, wow, I've never really thought about that before. But he wasn't arguing with me. He wasn't trying to tell me I was wrong or kind of disprove anything. He was just having a conversation with me. Probably about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, he fell asleep. And the one thing I had to do, like the one rule, is I had to bring a Bible with me. And I remember that my grandma had given me some 1,000-year-old King James Bible when I was a little kid, and I had taken that with me to this camp. And I went outside and sat by the campfire with this Bible, and I just opened it up. And I'm pretty sure it was the Gospel of John. And I started reading it, and it was like, for the first time in my life, I understood the words. It was like my whole life I had been reading the Bible or seeing life or experiencing the things of God through like a haze or a film, and I couldn't actually see it. And in this moment, I'm sitting at this campfire, and I could see it. And maybe even more importantly, I could feel it. And I knew by that campfire that there was a God who loved me even though I hated him. And that kind of led me to this moment of I've got to change everything. I am so far from God, nothing is right. And that's what I did. I started talking to the youth pastor. I asked him if I could just come over to his office every day after school, because I know if I didn't do that, I would be doing the other things that I needed to not do. Probably 3 months after this experience, I decided to get baptized, and I don't know, I can't explain it. I mean, my life was just radically different. The change was so quick that even in my senior year, I was voted the Bible president, the Bible club president in my senior year of high school. Wow. And I'm standing at my locker my senior year, and someone comes up to me and tries to buy drugs off me at my locker. And I'm like, no, I don't do that. I'm a Christian now. And they got mad at me because they thought I was making fun of them. And I'm like, no, really, I don't do this anymore. So, and if you fast forward to now, I'm a pastor. I have a wife who is an incredible follower of Jesus that tries to keep me along. I have 3 kids, and I would be lying if I said that a Christ-following life has been easy. But the one thing that's different from now to all the way back then is that I know now that I have this incredible God who was in step with me all along, every single step of my path. The stupid decisions I make or the great decisions I make, he's still with me. He's still there. He's still embracing me there. While that was true back then, I refused to believe it or experience it. And I experience it and believe it now. I know that God is with me now.
Yeah. Come on. Regardless of what story brought you here today, regardless of what you've done, or maybe even how you feel in this moment, you have a story to tell. We have a story to tell. Last week, we had challenged everyone to write their story out, and this week, we want to challenge and invite everyone to share that story. So I have 2 specific challenges. The first is this: share your story with other Christ followers. Some of you, maybe you've never shared your story before, or you feel maybe out of practice. That can be really intimidating. I would invite you this week in your small group, over coffee, with your family, with your community, just ask someone outright, can I tell you my story? And if you're not in a small group, friends, let me implore you, get into a small group. I believe that's where real life change happens. It is so worth the risk, but we can't just stop there though. And challenge 2 is this: share your story with someone on your Show Up Sunday list. At the bottom of this card, we put a space for 5 names. And we're asking every single person to write down 5 names of actual people that you're gonna prayerfully work towards inviting to Show Up Sunday. That's September 18th. We do it every fall, where we invite everyone to invite someone else to join us on September 18th. Your invitation could become a part of their My Way Back story. And as you think through these names, pray for opportunities to actually speak, to share. You will be blown away by the opportunities that God gives you when you are bold enough to pray that prayer. Let's be bold and see what happens. We have to remember Romans 10. How can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? How can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? Are people gonna find their way back to God every time we share our story? Of course not. But may it not be because we didn't open our mouths. May it not be because we didn't love them enough to even possibly feel awkward or uncomfortable to share the story of what God has done and is doing in our lives. Let's open our mouths. Let's share our stories, and let's trust God with the rest, because after all, tell me a fact, I'll learn it. Tell me a truth, I'll believe it, but tell me a story and that will live in my heart forever. Let's pray. God, thank you that you have written and are writing stories in all of our hearts. Thank you for entrusting us with that, for allowing us to join you in the work of redemption and restoration. I pray for every heart, every story in this room, that you would give us boldness, that you would give us courage to step out, to open our mouths, to release that potential energy of the story that you're writing with our lives. And may we do so not so that we're praised, but that you're praised, that you would be glorified in and through everything we say and do. We thank you, and we love you. And we pray all these things in the beautiful name of Jesus. Amen.